sent flying milk bottles.
Flying milk bottles?
You know, sometimes history delivers a story where the initial impression is completely disastrously wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we are strapping into a machine that was so massive, so seemingly ill-suited for the elegant dance of air combat, that its enemies laughed at it, right up until the moment it systematically tore their Air Force to shreds.
We are diving deep into the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. And yeah, forget the sleek lines of the Spitfire or the Mustang. The P-47 was, well, it was a brute.
A total brute.
When it first appeared in combat, the elite fighter pilots of the Luftwaffe, I mean, these were the most successful aces in the world at the time, they looked at its immense size and weight and famously dubbed it the flying milk bottle.
That epithet, flying milk bottle, it just sets the stage perfectly for this deep dive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This is the ultimate story of industrial logic and sheer, overwhelming, brute force engineering, defeating, tactical brilliance.
It really is.
So our mission here is to unpack the surprising facts from the sources that explain how this corpulent 7-ton machine went from being, well, an object of derision
A laughingstock, really.
to the primary instrument that completely dismantled the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. And all in less than 2 years.
It's an incredible reversal. And we start, as sources tell us, on April 8th, 1943. We're talking 27,000 feet above Caen, France. This is the P-47 making its combat debut over occupied Europe.
Right, and up above them you have these German veteran aces of HVAR 26.
Yeah.
Pilots who had pretty much dominated the skies since, 1939?
Yeah, the best of the best. And what they saw were these 16 P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group, and they were laboring, struggling hard to maintain that altitude.
And they just looked huge, didn't they? Far bigger than any European fighter they'd ever encountered.
Oberleutnant Ralph Hermanchen, an established ace, looked at this formation, this massive barrel-shaped silhouette, and he just couldn't help himself. He transmitted that iconic, dismissive phrase to his wingman. The Americans have sent them flying milk bottles.
Wow, just like that.
The mockery wasn't just, audible over the radio. It was a deeply held conviction that the Americans simply didn't understand fighter design, not like they did.
And when you compare the P-47 to, say, the Messerschmitt Bf 109 or the Focke-Wulf FW-190 aircraft that were really optimized for lightness, high climb rates, turn performance, the P-47 genuinely looked, well,
absolutely out of place. Its propeller alone dwarfed anything in the German inventory. It looked wrong.
German design philosophy, it really favored the nimble, right? The efficient.
Exactly. And the P-47 looked like a heavy bomber trying to impersonate a pursuit plane. But as we'll see, everything they mocked, the bulk, the weight, the sheer size, was the very element that ultimately ensured the P-47's success and the Luftwaffe's eventual ruin.
So we need to figure out what was loaded into those broad wings that the German pilots just couldn't possibly see that day.
That's the core of it.
Okay, let's dive into that core engineering philosophy then. Section 1, the dinosaur design. This aircraft wasn't born out of elegance. It was born out of sheer necessity and, frankly, panic.
Cold War panic, yeah. We trace its origin right back to the immediate aftermath of the fall of France in June 1940, a really dark time. The U.S. Army Air Corps suddenly realized they needed a high-altitude interceptor, and they needed it, like yesterday.
And that urgency, that panic, it landed squarely on the desk of Alexander Kartveli. He was Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer.
And the requirements the Army laid out were radical for the time. The aircraft had to carry heavy armament and, critically, fight effectively above 30,000 feet. That demanded massive power.
Which inevitably means massive weight.
Exactly. There was no way around it with the technology available then. And Kartveli, to his credit, didn't shy away from the bulk. He accepted it as a necessity.
That famous quote attributed to him telling his design team, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." That really sums up the American approach, doesn't it?
It does. Engineering compromises were acceptable as long as they delivered overwhelming capability in the key areas. Performance over elegance.
And the result, the XP-47B prototype, it was a massive shock when it first flew in May 1941. I mean, 9,900 pounds empty. That's
65% heavier than its immediate predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. 65%. Test pilots genuinely struggled with the concept. You read their initial reactions, and it's pure incredulity. This thing actually flies.
It only flew because of the terrifying power packed into its nose. Let's talk about that engine, the absolute foundation of the P-47's philosophy, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp.
Ah, the Double Wasp, an absolute monster, an 18-cylinder, two-row radial engine churning out 2,000 horsepower right out of the box.
But just having horsepower isn't enough when you're fighting way up high in the thin air of the stratosphere, right?
Precisely. The challenge was maintaining that power where it mattered most. And that is where Kartveli's genius, or maybe pragmatic engineering, really lay, and it's why the plane looked so, well, junky.
We're talking about the famous turbo-supercharger system. This is really the defining technical feature of the Thunderbolt, isn't it?
It is. For our listeners, maybe we should break down why this system demanded such a massive fuselage.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so to maintain sea level power way up at 27,000 feet, you need to compress the thin air dramatically before it gets to the engine's carburetor. Makes sense?
Right, force feed it.
Exactly. Now, the R-2800 engine itself was massive, sitting up front, but the actual turbo-supercharger unit, this thing, uses hot exhaust gases to spin a turbine, which then compresses the intake air. That unit was placed way back, in the rear of the fuselage, just behind the pilot.
So you've got the engine at the front, the turbo at the back. They had to be connected somehow.
And that's the key to the P-47's shape. It required immense, incredibly complex ducting. We're talking long, large-diameter pipes running from the engine's exhaust manifolds down under the cockpit floor all the way to the back to spin that turbine. And then another set of ducts had to carry the now compressed intake air all the way back up front again to the engine compartment. This long, convoluted pathway meant the fuselage had to be wide and deep to contain it all. It's essentially an 18-foot internal plumbing system running through the aircraft.
Wow. An 18-foot pipe?
Pretty much. All that internal volume, all that bulk, it delivered what the German fighters fundamentally lacked: sea-level performance in the stratosphere. It gave the P-47 the critical energy advantage at the highest combat altitudes.
Sounds like a maintenance nightmare, honestly.
Oh, it absolutely was initially, but a performance dream when it worked. However, despite all that power, the initial training phase was brutal. The sources are really clear on this. American pilots, especially those first guys in the 56 Fighter Group under Major Hub Zemke, they had a catastrophic learning curve.
Just trying to tame the beast.
The aircraft was simply overpowered for the training methods and maybe even the experience levels of the day. The P-47 was a killer in training, no exaggeration. Between September 1942 and January 1943, Zemke's unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft.
41 planes, before even seeing combat.
More losses than they would initially suffer in combat. And it was down to basically three main things: torque roll, ground loops, and this really terrifying phenomenon called compressibility.
Okay, torque roll seems straightforward. That massive prop spinning creates so much rotational force, the plane wants to flip itself over on takeoff. Ground loops, too, wrestling it on the ground. But compressibility, that sounds nasty. When pilots dove too fast, what was the actual physical danger?
Compressibility was terrifying because it was unexpected. As the P-47, with all its mass, dove at really high speeds, often approaching the speed of sound, which is actually lower at high altitude, the air could no longer flow smoothly over the thick wing surfaces. It started to, well, bunch up. Shock waves would form.
So the air itself is stacking up, becoming compressed, acting almost like a solid wall against the control surfaces.
Precisely, like hitting invisible bricks. The aerodynamic forces generated by these shock waves were immense, so strong they would effectively lock the elevator and aileron controls solid. The stick would freeze.
So the pilot is just riding a brake.
Essentially, yes. Plummeting toward the Earth at 550 miles per hour, unable to pull out at the dive, unable to turn or adjust direction. Many early pilots died, likely believing their controls had physically jammed or failed.
Oh, man.
But the ones who survived, they learned to respect the machine's sheer mass and speed. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, who we'll hear more about, he summed up that raw industrial nature perfectly. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. You didn't fly it, you aimed it.
That's a powerful image. Let's use that transition to move into actual combat then.
Yeah.
And Section 2, the durability enigma. Because in April and May 1943, when they first entered service over Europe, those initial German tactical prejudices seemed entirely justified.
They really did. The P-47 struggled. They just couldn't turn with the nimble Focke-Wulf 190s, nor could they keep pace climbing at medium altitudes where a lot of the initial intercepts happened.
The Germans basically confirmed their first impressions, right? Josef Pips Priller, the commanding officer of JG-26, he reported back that the P-47 was, quote, meat for the slaughter.
Yeah, his full quote is pretty blunt. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Ouch.
They call them Indiana Fat Targets. And the initial loss stats, they seemed to back up the mockery, didn't they?
They did. In that first month of operations, the Americans lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like a major American engineering failure, a waste of resources.
But this is where the German focus on those traditional metrics, turn radius, climb rate, it blinded them to the fundamental shift in air combat philosophy the P-47 actually represented.
Which was survivability through sheer mass and ruggedness. They missed the hidden strength, what we're calling the durability enigma.
And this is where the sources offer just staggering examples of resilience. Give us an idea of the kind of punishment these machines could actually absorb and still fly.
The combat reports from that first month, May 1943 particularly, are almost unbelievable. We have this one specific, well-documented example of an aircraft returning from a mission on May 4th. It had 21 high-explosive 20mm cannon holes cleaned through it.
21 cannon shells.
Yes, and over 100 machine gun strikes counted on the airframe. Now, you put that level of damage on a Messerschmitt or a Spitfire?
It would have disintegrated midair or been completely uncontrollable.
Absolutely. The P-47, though, according to the report, it just shook it off and brought the pilot home across the channel.
Why? What was the key mechanical difference that allowed that?
It comes back to that engine again. The air-cooled radial. This is absolutely critical. German fighters, like the Bf 109, were primarily powered by liquid-cooled engines like the Daimler-Benz inverted V12. Great engines, very streamlined.
But vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable. A single, well-placed machine gun round, even a .30 caliber, puncturing a coolant line or the radiator, meant the engine would overheat and seize solid in minutes. Pilot had to bail out or try a forced landing, usually behind enemy lines.
But the Thunderbolt's engine.
The massive Pratt & Whitney radial, however, it lacked this Achilles heel of a liquid cooling system. It was air-cooled. Plus, it was ruggedly constructed and often partially shielded by thick steel armor plate around the oil coolers and cockpit. It could literally take 20mm cannon shells directly into the crankcase, shake violently, maybe lose a cylinder or two.
And just keep running.
And keep turning long enough, often for the pilot to limp back across the channel to England. It might sound rough, but it was running.
So the bulky air-cooled engine, initially criticized for all that drag and weight, was actually one of its greatest life-saving features.
Exactly. It was almost like unintended armor. And the ultimate, absolutely legendary anecdote that cemented the P-47's structural integrity in the minds of both sides. This is the story of Robert Johnson's survival on June 26, 1943, over Lazo, France.
This incident really became a turning point in the psychological war, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Johnson's formation was jumped, bounced by 16 one-man 90s, led by none other than Wilhelm Galland, Adolf Galland's brother. Johnson was flying tail-end Charlie, the most vulnerable position, and he was hit almost immediately.
And not just hit, catastrophically hit.
Oh, yeah. The sources detail the destruction vividly. 2 20mm shells exploded right across his P-47. The canopy was shattered instantly and jammed shut the tracks, apparently welded together by shrapnel trapping him inside.
Trapped inside a burning plane.
His hydraulics failed, control feedback went mushy, and a fire erupted behind the instrument panel. He was wounded, partially blinded by hydraulic fluid and smoke, trapped in what should have been a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. He did the only thing he could possibly do.
Pointed towards England?
Point the crippled wreckage toward England and hope. He had no way to bail out. Survival depended entirely on the machine's ability to keep flying somehow.
And that's when the second phase of this unbelievable encounter happened.
Right. As he's limping back, losing altitude, flying slow, less than 170 mph, a lone thick W-190 discovers him. Easy kill, right?
You'd think so. A sitting duck.
The German pilot, confident, positioned himself perfectly behind and executed a full textbook attack run. He emptied his entire ammunition load, 4 20mm cannons, 2 heavy 13mm machine guns directly into the already battered P-47, point-blank range, basically.
He must have assumed there was zero possibility of survival after that barrage.
He absolutely must have. But the Thunderbolt kept flying, riddled, smoking, but flying. Out of ammunition, the German pilot pulled alongside the shredded P-47. He flew wingtip to wingtip, staring directly into Johnson's cockpit.
What did Johnson see?
Johnson later said the German pilot's face shifted from, predatory confidence to absolute confused astonishment. This German pilot, having delivered more than enough firepower to kill 3 normal fighters, just couldn't comprehend how this thing was still in the air.
What did he do?
He just looked, shook his head slightly in disbelief, gave Johnson an informal salute, and peeled away, presumably running low on fuel himself or maybe just utterly bewildered.
That is genuinely astonishing, that salute. It speaks volumes. It makes you wonder what was going through the mind of that German ace.
Prospect. Confusion. Maybe a bit of fear at what this implied.
So when Johnson finally somehow managed to wrestle the plane back and landed at Manston, what did the damage assessment actually reveal? How bad was it?
The crew chiefs, they literally stopped counting bullet and cannon shell holes after 200. The plane had taken hits that had severed multiple control cables they were frayed, barely holding. Critically, inspection showed hits had shot clean through 3 of the main structural longerons.
The main spine of the fuselage.
Yes, the primary load-bearing members. By all rights, the fuselage should have buckled and broken apart in midair under the stress. But the sheer amount of aluminum, the redundancy in the structure, it just held together.
The engineers, maybe accidentally, had built a near-indestructible flying tank.
Pretty much. And this single flight, this one incident, it fundamentally redefined the meaning of combat damage tolerance for both the Americans and the Germans. The Germans now had to reckon with this terrifying new reality. The flying milk bottle was harder to kill than a 4-engine bomber.
Okay, so the machine could survive the hits. But the real question is, what did it hit back with? Which transitions us nicely into Section 3, the convergence of destruction. This is where we focus on the P-47's firepower, which really embodied that American industrial principle of more is better.
Oh, absolutely. Overwhelming firepower was core to its design. It didn't carry cannon like most German fighters. It carried this massive battery of 8 Browning M2.5 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing.
8.50 cals. What kind of volume of fire are we talking about?
Total ammunition load was huge, around 3,400 rounds, and the combined rate of fire from all 8 guns was about 6,000 rounds per minute.
6,000 rounds a minute.
That's roughly 100 projectiles exiting the barrels every single second. Think about that.
That's not a burst of fire. That's a continuous, concentrated stream of heavy slugs. The source material highlights this volume was enough concentrated lead to literally saw a Messerschmitt Bisch 109 in half in less than 2 seconds of sustained contact.
It's brutal. And we need to maybe detail the physics of that convergence zone a bit.
Yeah, how do they ensure all those bullets hit the same spot?
The guns in the wings were angled slightly inward, so at a typical engagement distance, say 300 yards or so, the ballistic paths of all 8 guns intersected. They converged into a tight zone, maybe about 6 feet in diameter.
So anything unlucky enough to fly through that 6-foot circle
Was simply obliterated by 100 rounds per second, hitting it almost simultaneously. The impact wasn't just quantitative, it was qualitatively different. It shredded things.
And the industrial advantage wasn't just the number of guns, it was the amount of ammo they carried, right? The sustainability.
Exactly. German fighters, especially those with cannon, were often limited. Maybe 120 to 200 rounds of cannon ammunition per gun, sometimes less. They had to be precise, fire in short bursts.
But the P-47 pilots,
They could hold down the trigger and maintain that devastating fire for over 30 seconds continuously if needed. 30 seconds? That is an absolute eternity in a swirling dogfight.
and the ammunition itself, it wasn't just standard bullets.
No, the standard combat load was specifically designed for maximum destruction. It wasn't just simple ball ammunition. It was typically a mixed belt load of armor-piercing incendiary, or API.
Armor-piercing incendiary. Sounds nasty.
API tracer rounds, so the pilot could see the stream, and some standard ball mixed in. But those API rounds were the real killers.
Tell us about those. What made them so effective?
They were brutal. The API rounds used a delayed chemical fuse. They were designed with a hardened penetrator nose to punch through the relatively thin aluminum skin and maybe some of the internal structure of the enemy aircraft before the incendiary compound ignited.
So it sets a fire inside the plane.
Exactly. A fire burning at something like 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This meant catastrophic internal destruction, fuel tanks, oil lines, oxygen systems, control linkages, rather than just punching holes in the surface.
Lieutenant Colonel Gabi Gabreski, the top American ace in Europe, he put it pretty bluntly, didn't he?
He did. His quote is chilling. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw a 109 literally cut in half. That reflects the difference between maybe a single high-explosive cannon hit and this sustained internal incendiary barrage.
It just overwhelmed the target's structure.
Utterly. And this incredible firepower capability was backed by equally staggering industrial production. The sheer logistics are mind-boggling. Just one facility, the Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, was churning out 30 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition every single month by mid-1944.
30 million rounds a month.
An American P-47 pilot basically never had to worry about conserving ammunition. They could hose down a target area if they needed to.
Okay, so you have this incredibly heavy, incredibly durable platform just loaded with unbelievable firepower. The American pilots just had to figure out how to deliver that firepower effectively without getting sucked into a turning fight, which they knew they'd lose.
And that led directly to the doctrine that really defined Thunderbolt combat: boom and zoom.
This was Colonel Hub Zemke's solution, right? Having watched his pilots suffer in those early disastrous turning dogfights.
Yes. Zemke finally cracked the code. The Thunderbolt was too heavy to turn and fight like a Spitfire, but that weight, that mass, could be weaponized. His hard-won secret, the mantra he drilled into his pilots, was simple. Don't turn with them. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns.
Which means using altitude and dive speed.
Exactly. Get above the enemy. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 in a dive could reach astonishing speeds, well over 550 mph faster than any German fighter could possibly follow without risking structural failure or compressibility themselves.
So they dive down.
They dive down, line up the target, unleash that devastating 8-gun burst for just a second or two, and then, critically, use the immense kinetic energy from the dive to convert that speed back into altitude in a zoom climb.
Leaving the German fighters far below.
Leaving the German pursuers wallowing far below, unable to follow the climb, unable to catch up. They refused the turning fight entirely.
Captain Walker Mahurin, one of Zemke's pilots, he really formalized this into the boom and zoom tactic. It got a nickname, didn't it?
Yeah, it was dubbed the Thunderbolt turkey shoot because it was so brutally efficient at isolating and destroying single German aircraft, often stragglers or lower elements of a formation, without ever engaging in a sustained, risky maneuvering contest.
It was complete tactical paradigm shift. They weren't dogfighting in the traditional sense anymore.
No. As one German pilot described it, they came down like hammers from heaven. They were executing high-speed assassinations, relying on the aircraft's sheer power and durability to escape unscathed. It perfectly utilized the Thunderbolt's unique strengths and completely mitigated its weaknesses in turning performance.
That incredible high-speed diving capability, born from its weight and power, leads us perfectly into Section 4, high-altitude dominance and the crucial psychological shift. Because that massive turbo-supercharger system, the thing that required all that bulk, that was the ultimate tactical game-changer up high.
Absolutely. It cannot be overstated. The P-47 maintained full, blistering engine performance, sea-level power, basically, right up to 30,000 feet. Its operational service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet.
While the German fighters,
especially the WWII and even the later variants of the Bf-109, they relied on less efficient, mechanically driven superchargers. Their engine performance degraded significantly, quite rapidly, in fact, above about 25,000 feet. The air just got too thin for their systems.
meaning that at the altitudes where the big bomber escort battles often took place, say, 28,000 feet and above, the German pilots were flying aircraft that felt sluggish, almost like they were half power.
Exactly. Their controls felt mushy, their climb rate dropped off, their acceleration was poor.
While the P-47's flying top cover were still operating with full power, full responsiveness.
They were essentially sitting ducks up there, if caught unawares. The thin air was poison to the German fighters' performance, but the P-47 thrived in it. This harsh reality was brutally demonstrated by the fatal encounter of Oberleutnant Hans Philipp on October 8, 1943, over Bremen.
Hans Philipp, one of Germany's absolute top aces, wasn't he? Huge number of victories.
A true expert. 206 confirmed victories at the time of his death. A national hero. His loss was a massive psychological blow to the Luftwaffe and to Germany.
Because it proved that even the best, most experienced tactical flyer couldn't compensate for a machine that was just fundamentally superior at high altitude.
Precisely that. Reports indicate his FUI-90 was described by his wingman as feeling sluggish and unresponsive at 28,000 feet, when a flight of P-47s dove on his formation from significantly higher, around 32,000 feet.
Robert Johnson was involved again.
Robert Johnson, now an established ace himself after his survival ordeal, filed the clinical combat report confirming the kill on Philipp. Philipp's fiery destruction sent absolute shockwaves through the Luftwaffe High Command. The thinking was stark. If an ace of Phillips caliber with all his tactical skill couldn't survive the high-altitude fight against the Thunderbolt, what chance did the average German pilot have?
Zero chance, basically. The Germans ordered an immediate investigation, didn't they, into the P-47's capabilities?
They did, and the report delivered to Hermann Goering in November 1943 was incredibly sobering for them. They finally had to admit, officially, that the P-47's dive speed approached the speed of sound, that its armor protection was exceptionally heavy, and its rugged construction allowed it to absorb damage that, and this is a direct quote from the German report, would have obliterated 3 conventional fighters.
Wow, they knew.
They knew. And just as the Germans started maybe adapting their tactics to counter these known strengths, the Americans delivered another blow through continuous improvement, eliminating the P-47's only remaining major perceived flaw, its initial climb rate.
This is the critical mid-war engineering pivot we need to talk about. The P-47D-22 variant, introduced around January 1944. This is the famous paddle blade propeller model, right?
The one. A seemingly small change, but with enormous consequences. They replaced the standard propeller with a new, wider-chord, 13-foot diameter Hamilton Standard hydromatic paddle blade propeller. These massive blades look like, well, paddles.
And they could grab more air.
They could grab significantly more air, maximizing the thrust being delivered by that immense 2,000 horsepower R-2800 engine, especially at lower speeds and during climbs.
And what was the immediate measurable result in performance?
The climb rate jumped dramatically. From a respectable but not stellar 2,200 feet per minute in earlier models, it leaped to a blistering 3,000 feet per minute, or even slightly more under ideal conditions.
3,000 feet per minute, that puts it.
That allowed the improved Thunderbolt to match or even exceed the climb performance of the latest German fighters, like the FW-190AA-8 or the Bf-109G6, at virtually all altitudes. It completely eliminated the deficiency that Pips Priller had mocked less than a year earlier. The pregnant cow could suddenly climb like a rocket.
The German reaction must have been one of alarm.
Utter alarm. We see it reflected in pilot diaries. Oberleutnant Heinz Nock, a notable Luftwaffe ace, wrote in his combat diary in February 1944, noting the shift, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." The game had changed again.
And that new propeller, it didn't just improve performance, it added a sound signature too.
It did, a terrifying acoustic signature. The tips of those huge paddle blades moving so quickly often approached or exceeded supersonic speeds, especially in dives or high-power settings. This created a very distinct, deep, threatening rumble or tearing sound. The Donnerschlag, the Germans called it, the thunderclap.
A sound that German ground troops learned to fear.
They learned to identify it immediately. If you heard the Donnerschlag, it meant death from above was approaching, and it was fast, heavily armed, and incredibly hard to bring down. It became a potent psychological weapon in its own right.
So by early 1944, you've got high-altitude dominance, incredible firepower, amazing durability, and now competitive climb rate. What was the last piece of the puzzle?
Range. By March 1944, the final tactical advantage fell into place with the widespread adoption of external fuel tanks. Drop tanks. These could be jettisoned when empty or when combat was joined.
And these extended the P-47's range significantly.
Hugely, to over 1,000 miles depending on the tank configuration and flight profile. Suddenly, the Thunderbolts weren't just limited to sweeps over France or the Low Countries. They could escort the B-17s and B-24s deep into the German industrial heartland. Berlin, Schweinfurt, Leipzig, all the way to the target and back.
And this highlighted another crucial advantage the P-47 had over its German adversaries, didn't it? Endurance.
Yes, endurance and fuel efficiency, relatively speaking. German fighters, especially when pushing their engines hard for maximum performance at altitude, burned fuel incredibly rapidly. Their time over the target area or their ability to stay engaged with the bombers was often severely limited, maybe 20-30 minutes of intense combat.
Whereas the big American radials,
The big P&W radials, while thirsty, could be leaned out and cruised quite efficiently at high altitude once they reached the bomber stream. This meant the Thunderbolts could often remain with the bombers for hours, providing continuous, overlapping top cover throughout the most dangerous phases of the mission.
Major Günther Rall, another top German ace who survived the war, he described the P-47s during these deep escort missions as an avalanche, didn't he?
He did. And his observation on their firepower was poignant. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. It was that overwhelming combination protection, high-altitude performance, endurance, and that unbelievable firepower that truly broke the back of the German fighter arm in the skies over the Reich.
Now, as the spring of 1944 moved into the summer, something interesting happened. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang in large numbers, with its even longer range thanks to its Merlin engine.
Right, the Mustang could go even deeper, all the way to Poland sometimes.
So the Mustang took over many of those super long-range escort missions. This freed up the battle-hardened P-47s to fully embrace their secondary but equally devastating role, transitioning from pure fighter to what the Germans called Jabo-Jag bomber, fighter bomber.
Which brings us to Section V, from fighter to flying artillery. And the Thunderbolt, with its ruggedness and immense strength, was absolutely perfectly suited for the brutal demands of low-level strike missions, a role that demanded durability and a massive payload capacity.
And it could carry a serious payload, couldn't it? The later P-47D variants, like the D-25.
They could haul a bomb load equal to that of many early war medium bombers. We're talking up to 2,500 pounds total under the wings and fuselage. 2 1,000-pound bombs plus a centerline fuel tank, or various combinations of 500-pounders or fragmentation bombs.
2,500 pounds on a single-engine fighter. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And it only got worse for the Germans on the ground when they later added the rockets, right? The HVARs.
Oh yeah, the 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. 10 of them, usually carried under the wings on zero-length launchers. Each one of those HVAR rockets delivered the explosive force roughly equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell.
So firing a salvo of 10.
It was like dropping a tactical artillery barrage exactly where you wanted it, with pinpoint accuracy compared to towed guns. It could completely overwhelm localized defenses, strong points, tanks, anything caught in the open.
The impact on German ground operations, particularly during the Normandy campaign and the breakout across France, must have been instant and devastating, both physically and psychologically.
Absolutely devastating. We have accounts like that of Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding a Panzer Grenadier regiment in France during the Normandy fighting. He detailed the sheer psychological terror and physical destruction caused by P-47 ground attacks.
What did he say?
He described them coming in low. So low you could see the pilots' faces behind the thick glass. He recounted watching a column of his supply trucks, maybe 20 vehicles, simply ceased to exist, transformed into burning wreckage in a single P-47 pass using bombs and strafing runs.
Wow. Ceased to exist.
The Germans learned to fear them instantly on the ground. They called them flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. The sheer scale of destruction they inflicted on German logistics and armored formations is hard to comprehend even now.
The statistics really bear that out, don't they?
They are staggering. They highlight the systematic destruction of the German war machine's mobility during that critical summer of 1944. In just 1 month, June 1944, the P-47s of the U.S. 9th Air Force alone claimed credit for destroying 651 locomotives.
651 trains.
Locomotives, yes, along with over 3,800 trucks and logistical vehicles, and 512 tanks and armored vehicles confirmed destroyed. They weren't just hitting frontline units, they were systematically eliminating the Germans' ability to move reserves, fuel, ammunition, and supplies during the critical battles in France. They paralyzed them.
And incredibly, even when Germany deployed its technologically superior Me-262 jet fighter in numbers later in the war, the supposedly obsolete, propeller-driven P-47 still managed to adapt and score kills against them.
They did. Obviously, they couldn't outrun the jets in level flight. That was impossible. But the Thunderbolt pilots, ever adaptable, found specific tactical windows where the jets were surprisingly vulnerable.
How did they manage that?
The P-47s became specialists in ambushing the jets during their most vulnerable phases, mainly during takeoff and landing. The early jets required long, slow, vulnerable approaches to their airfields, often low on fuel after a mission, making them relatively easy targets for lurking Thunderbolts.
And the P-47's dive speed still played a role.
Absolutely. Catching them in high-speed dives from extreme altitude remained a viable tactic. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Myers' kill on November 27, 1944 is a great illustration. He dove his P-47 from 28,000 feet, reached speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, and caught a Me-262 from above.
The jet pilot probably felt completely safe at that speed.
Almost certainly. He likely didn't anticipate the P-47's extreme energy advantage coming down from the stratosphere. Myers' concentrated 8-gun .50 caliber fire, as the report states, simply disintegrated the Me-262.
And they even developed specialized versions later on?
Yes, towards the very end of the war, specialized P-47M variants were deployed. These had even more powerful R-2800 engines boosted by water methanol injection, pushing out maybe 2,800 horsepower for short bursts.
Making them faster.
Significantly faster. They could reach around 470 mile per hour in level flight at altitude, fast enough to consistently catch and destroy the Me-262s even during the attack phase, not just on takeoff or landing. They were specifically deployed as jet interceptors.
But ultimately, the story of the Thunderbolt, and maybe the air war in Europe overall, isn't just about a better plane or even a better tactic. It's about industrial, overwhelming superiority, isn't it? This is the final nail in the coffin for the Luftwaffe. The sheer numbers, the production pipeline.
It really is, and the famous anecdote from Operation Bodenplatte, the Germans' last desperate gamble to wipe out Allied air power on the ground on January 1st, 1945, proves this point perfectly.
Tell us that story.
Okay, so during the attack, German fighters managed to destroy 22 P-47s on the ground at one airfield, Y-34 in Belgium. A captured German pilot, apparently quite arrogant, taunted the American base commander, Major George Brooking, about their significant loss.
And Major Brooking's response.
Brooking's legendary, chilling response just encapsulated the brutal reality of the American war machine. He looked at the German pilot and said something like, "Yeah, you got 22 of ours. By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones flown in. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?"
Oof, that must have hit hard.
The smirk apparently vanished from the captured German pilot's face because he knew the answer. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47s were indeed filling the empty spots on the flight line. The Americans lost about 134 aircraft total across all types in Bodenplatte, all replaced within about a week. The Luftwaffe, however, lost 271 precious aircraft and, critically, 213 highly trained, absolutely irreplaceable pilots and flight leaders. It was a catastrophic loss for them.
The production metrics behind this are just genuinely mind-boggling when you look at them.
They are. Republic Aviation produced a staggering 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts by the war's end. That's the most produced American fighter aircraft ever. At its peak, the main Farmingdale factory on Long Island was completing one brand new Thunderbolt every single hour, 24 hours a day.
One plane an hour.
One plane an hour. Just think about that industrial might. And this production capability was coupled with an equally overwhelming training advantage.
What, the pilot pipeline.
By 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces were graduating around 30,000 fully trained pilots annually, each receiving a minimum of 400 hours of flight training before even heading to a combat unit. Many had significantly more.
Well, German pilots,
by contrast, due to fuel shortages, collapsing training programs, and desperate need at the front, were often entering combat with under 100 hours of total flight time by the war's end, sometimes as low as 50 or 60 hours. They simply didn't have the skill or experience necessary to even survive, let alone effectively utilize the few tactical advantages their lighter fighters might still have possessed.
Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, a replacement P-47 pilot, arriving in Europe in late 1944, he logged 420 hours total flight time before his first mission, including 75 hours just in the P-47 itself. His quote sums it up.
What did he say?
He said, "The average German pilot I faced in early 45 probably could have had half my experience, maybe less. Honestly, it didn't even feel like a fair fight most of the time."
And it wasn't. The P-47, in the end, was the perfect expression of essentially unlimited American resources backing a deliberately over-engineered, overpowered, incredibly survivable weapon system designed for a war of attrition.
So if we deliver the final verdict on the Thunderbolt, the total reversal of German opinion, from mockery in 43 to grudging respect and even fear by 45, it really stands as the aircraft's most profound tribute.
It really does. We started with Joseph Pix-Briller, who famously called it a pregnant cow in early 1943. By March 1945, his confidential assessment, which German propaganda officials actually deemed too demoralizing to publish, showed the complete 180-degree transformation in attitude.
What did Priller say in 45?
He stated it quite bluntly and without ambiguity that the Thunderbolt is, quote, the best fighter bomber ever built. Its firepower is unprecedented and its ability to absorb punishment is unmatched. And then the crucial part. We have nothing left but courage, and courage without resources is just delayed defeat.
Wow. That's a stark admission that sheer industrial capacity had ultimately negated tactical genius or individual bravery.
Completely. And the final statistics, they just underscored the sheer level of annihilation the P-47 inflicted. Thunderbolt units were officially credited with destroying 3,752 German aircraft in air-to-air combat.
almost 4,000 planes in the air.
Plus another 3,500 or so destroyed on the ground. But look at the ground attack numbers. 6,000 tanks and armored vehicles, 9,000 locomotives destroyed. It didn't just help defeat the Luftwaffe in the air. It systematically destroyed the German war machine's ability to move and fight on the ground.
And we should probably conclude with General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the famous former head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, reflecting back in 1985 on that colossal error in judgment the Luftwaffe made back in 1943.
Yeah, his reflection is very telling. He said, "We saw this big, heavy American fighter and we laughed. We genuinely thought the Americans simply didn't understand air combat philosophy."
But the truth, as Galland finally realized decades later, was that the Americans weren't trying to beat the Germans at their own game. They were fighting a different kind of war altogether.
Exactly. Galland continued, "The Americans didn't try to build a European fighter. They built an American one. Designed around production, firepower, and survivability above all else. It was a machine built for attrition, not for elegant finesse."
And Galland concluded his reflection by speaking of the sound, didn't he? The sound of those 8.50 caliber guns firing together.
He did. He said, "We called them Roosevelt's piano because of the unique ripping sound they made. Once you heard that sound, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time."
A chilling final thought from the enemy commander. The P-47 didn't win through revolutionary airframe design or superior agility. It won because its core design philosophy prioritized survivability, devastating sustained firepower, and mass production over traditional metrics like turn radius and climb rate. It was the physical expression of unstoppable industrial might.
Which leaves us with a provocative final thought for you, our listeners, to consider. The P-47 started its life as a joke, right? A heavy, ugly, seemingly uncompetitive machine compared to its peers. So the question is, what current technology, maybe in our highly visible modern era, is being mocked or laughed at today?
Good question.
Whether it's maybe an ungainly-looking drone or a massive, seemingly over-engineered piece of infrastructure, or maybe some cumbersome new technological platform. What's being laughed at now only to potentially become the symbol of unstoppable industrial, material, or logistical might tomorrow, precisely because its core philosophy prioritizes overwhelming resources, resilience, and brute force effectiveness over elegance or initial efficiency.
Something to chew on indeed. That's all for this deep dive.